Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. This is episode 21, and today we're going to take what we do and turn it. We've spent nearly 20 episodes of the program discussing how you can use positive reinforcement training to elicit desired behaviors, but not a lot of that time talking about how to deal with inappropriate behaviors. In this episode, we'll talk about the difference between emotional reactions and conscious decisions, negative punishment and positive punishment, especially in light of a new study from UPenn, and we'll wrap it up with an important takeaway on how to use negative punishment to extinguish unwanted behaviors. Let's go. Devin, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thanks. So, consequences for unwanted behaviors.
My dog made a boo-boo. We're first going to take a little tour of human psychology since it applies so well. The behavior is generated from different parts of the brain, and in this way, humans and dogs are very much the same. Mm-hmm. So there are two primary behavior origins. One is emotional, and that starts in the amygdala, and that's your flight or fight response. We have it and they have it. Emotional behavior or emotionally generated, it's actually wrong to call it decisions. Emotionally generated behaviors bypass the ventricle cortex, which is the part of the brain where you make decisions. So, for example, if I'm...
Ventricle cortex.
That's the part of the brain. So if I'm out walking in the woods and a snake comes across my path, I jump back 5 feet. That jumping decision never made it to my ventricle cortex.
That's a flight reflex.
It's a flight reflex, and it when your amygdala is stimulated by fear or extreme emotion, but by fear in this case, it takes over the show.
Right. Okay.
And that keeps you alive, because if the snake were in your path and you debated about it, I wonder if that's a poisonous snake. Maybe I should jump back. Maybe I shouldn't. By the time you actually reached a decision, you could be dead.
Right.
So in really dire circumstances, and fear is an extreme but common example of it, your amygdala takes over, it calls the shots, you then regroup, and the rest of your brain kicks in after the fact. So this is actually what post-traumatic stress syndrome is.
Right, okay.
That's a highly sensitive amygdalan response, essentially.
Right. So it's not part of the decision-making process.
There's no decisions being made there. There's no decisions being made versus the decision-making process. And let me say this to back up just a little bit. Pavlov and Pavlov's bells and dogs, that's all emotional, non-decision-making behavior.
Okay.
So when those dogs heard the bell, they didn't have a debate. Could it be food? Maybe that's food. Wouldn't it be a good idea?
Decide to salivate.
Right. It's like they didn't say, okay, salivate now, the food's coming. It's bell rang, saliva happened. It never, that behavior didn't come from the ventricle cortex at all. So as luck would have it, we actually use Pavlovian conditioning in working with emotional responses. We've talked about this in our on-leash reactivity. So that's the emotional world and emotional behavior, and very often those are fear-based behaviors. Now, on the other side of this spectrum are decisions. And this is where Skinner comes in, B.F. Skinner. Okay. And we've talked a lot about dogs making good decisions and getting rewards for those good decisions. Right. What we haven't really talked about is what happens when they make bad decisions.
Which happens on occasion.
More than on, not on rare occasion. It happens, initially when you have a new puppy, it's probably 50-50, right? They make good decisions and bad decisions about equally because they don't know.
Testing the boundaries all the time.
Well, they're trying to figure out the lay of the land, and you do that by trying stuff. And dogs are so lovely this way. They'll try a strategy, and if it fails, they'll give it up. Something that I wish human beings would do. Because if that were the case, positive training would be the only kind of training there were. But that's a whole nother story. So, So back to decision-making and Skinner. So with B.F. Skinner, there are 4 principles of operant conditioning, which means that there are 4 techniques that you can apply to behaviors that are based on decision-making processes.
Okay.
And as we've discussed in the past, we've talked about positive reinforcement, which means, and in the B.F. Skinner world, positive and negative do not mean good and bad.
Right.
Do not mean beneficial and non-beneficial. Positive means you're adding something to the environment.
Okay.
Negative means you're removing something from the environment. So
it's really a purely mathematical term.
It's a mathematical term, exactly. So we've talked about positive reinforcement, adding something to the behavior, life rewards. as a consequence of good decisions.
Right. Life rewards or treats or...
Right. But good things
toys.
happen when you make good decisions, and that increases your making good decisions.
Okay.
So now what we're going to talk about is the punishment side of the behavior or the equation. And may I say that there's positive reinforcement and there's also negative reinforcement. Okay. So we've talked about positive reinforcement, adding something to the environment to increase a behavior.
Right.
Negative reinforcement is removing something from the environment to increase a behavior.
Okay, so I take away the toy or I take
No.
away... No.
Because taking away a toy isn't going to increase a behavior. Positive means adding something. Negative means removing something. Reinforcement means we're trying to increase the likelihood of the behavior.
Okay.
Punishment means we're trying to decrease it.
I see.
So
okay,
positive reinforcement, we're adding something to the environment to increase the behavior. With negative reinforcement, we're taking something away from the environment to increase the behavior.
Oh, okay.
Often what we're taking away is pain. So for example,
I see. Okay.
one of the ways they used to teach an obedience exercise, an AKC obedience, where dogs hold dumbbells in their mouth, and they're metal dumbbells and they don't taste good.
Right.
They used to pinch their ear really hard. And the dog would be like, ow, that hurts. And they'd put the dumbbell in their mouth. And when they held the dumbbell, they'd let go of the ear pinch. So the bad thing went away when you did what I wanted. If you do more of what I want, you won't have the bad thing.
I see. Okay.
So just like there are negative and positive components to reinforcement, there's negative and positive components to punishment as well. So positive punishment refers to adding something to the environment to decrease a behavior.
Okay.
What is added is something unpleasant, right? Because you're trying to decrease a behavior. So if the dog does it and something bad happens, hopefully the dog won't do it as much. So examples of positive punishment. Go ahead.
Well, is this what we call aversives?
These are aversives.
Oh,
aversives fall under the category of positive punishment. So that could be, I think it's really interesting how people now are calling leash corrections leash pops to sort of
I've
make them
noticed that.
seem a little bit less aversive.
I've heard that word thrown around a couple of times in the past month. I was curious about that.
But it can be as mild as knock it off. I mean, it can be you've added something, right? Your voice to decrease a behavior. Sure. It can be spray of water to a jumping up dog. On the other end of the equation, it can be a shock collar. It can be physical force.
Right.
So that's positive punishment. And there's also negative punishment. And negative punishment, so let's remember we're removing something from the environment because it's negative.
Right.
Punishment means we're trying to decrease a behavior. So with negative punishment, and this is what you alluded to earlier, we're removing something the dog likes from the environment to in the presence of an inappropriate behavior. So the dog does something inappropriate, we take away something they like.
Gotcha.
Interestingly enough, they did this at SeaWorld with the killer whales.
Right.
In a training session. This was very standard at SeaWorld. If the killer whale didn't participate, they would take away a favorite toy, and they'd take away a favorite toy. And there was one afternoon where I guess it was kind of a rough training session, and in the end there was no toys in the pool. And the next time the trainer got in the pool, he was pinned to the bottom of the pool by the whale.
Wow.
And they do not use negative punishment at SeaWorld anymore. That's how powerful it is.
I can imagine, yeah.
That's how powerful it is. So when people say to me, it's not going to matter if you take something away. It's like if you understand your dog's value system and you take it away immediately, it's amazing how effective it is.
Right.
So that's what's going to be what we're talking about today, positive versus negative punishment.
The two guiding principles here, just to reiterate what you're talking about again, Devin, is that we're talking about conscious decisions and how we're going to deal with those. We're not talking about emotional decisions, things like instinctive reactions.
Prey drive, fear reactions, those are all involuntary, unconscious behaviors, and they fall under Pavlov. So yeah, we are talking about
voluntary decisions,
conscious decision making,
and we're
on the part of the dog.
On the part, yeah, right. Or
and hopefully people too, but on the part of the dog.
This is kind of psychology 101 too. So
yes, it is.
You might learn a little bit more listening today than you bargained for. So we're talking about conscious decision making, how we're going to deal with that, and we're going to talk about negative punishment, removing something from the environment. We're also going to talk about some of the unintended consequences of positive punishment that have resulted.
Right. We're going to look at both kinds of punishment.
Right. We're also going to talk about some of the something that's come to light in a new survey or in a new study from UPenn on the unintended consequences, negative consequences of positive punishment.
And this is actually not a new. There have been other studies about this. This is the most recent one.
Right.
So this might be surprising to our listeners, but for those of us that have been doing this for some time and are really interested in sort of the scientific backing and research based on the theories that we have, there have been other studies, but this is the most recent.
Yeah, and it's as we move forward, I have a feeling this is fairly complex right now, but as we move forward, this will all start to make sense.
Did we lose everyone? I feel like maybe I lost everyone that first go around.
So, no.
I'm sorry, everyone, if I lost you. Come back.
So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Canine Campus Podcast.
Sit, stay.
Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. We're talking about decision making and dealing with undesired decisions. Devin, where did we leave off? This is all pretty heavy stuff.
Well, first I left them in a sit stay, so that's all. You're now released. Okay,
nice.
You can now continue on your merry way. So we're going to talk about positive punishment. We have these two forms of punishment, and punishment, again, is just something that decreases the behavior.
Right.
So when a dog makes a decision, like, to jump up when you'd prefer they sit when they greeted people, what to do in light of that. So first we're going to talk about positive punishment, because this has been the most prevalent form of punishment used in training of dogs traditionally, and it's continued to be popularized by Cesar Millan and others.
Right.
So with positive punishment, you add something to the environment to decrease a behavior. So for example, the belief is that if the dog jumps up and you yell at the dog, or you knee the dog in the chest, or you slap the dog on the nose, or you spray the dog with water, or you shock the dog, or you give the dog a leash pop, that this will decrease the likelihood of their jumping up in the future.
Right.
So, the University of, well, actually, before we get to the UPenn study, I have an email about a nationally renowned breeder encouraging the use of physical force to correct a dog that got in a fight with another dog in a house.
Right. And the purpose of this really is to give an idea of some of the thinking behind and around this kind of positive punishment as a training
This is an
tool.
example of positive punishment.
Right.
And what I think, why I think this email is so important is because within the email and within the suggestions on how to essentially beat a dog properly, that's really what this email is about. There are such clear misunderstandings and wrong beliefs that this UPenn study that we will be talking about cites as the reason that they're seeing certain aggression issues. So basically, and this is near and dear to my heart because everyone might remember that we have two dogs that fight. We have two hounds that fight. And for a certain amount of time, it was really kind of hard living in our house. I mean, there were gates up and dogs were segregated. And I will say that at no time did we ever use physical force or correction. We had to separate the dogs, and that took physical force. I mean, you have to grab collars and tails.
But there were no aversives used.
Absolutely not. I mean, and here we are, a year later.
With dogs that nap together.
That nap together. And I'm not saying that that's possible with all dogs that don't like each other, but it certainly would not have been possible if we had used aversives.
Right. Well, let's take a look at this email and the thinking behind.
So the email, basically there's a fight in the household between a 14-month-old sexually mature dog who is intact.
Okay.
And she fights with actually an older male dog in the house. Doesn't cause a couple puncture wounds, but doesn't cause any significant damage. So the breeder says to the owner of this dog, aggression is one behavior that I will dole out immediate and severe punishment for, as severe as the dog's actions were. So then she goes on to say basically that she would grab the dog and firmly, harshly, and quickly slap the dog around until the dog is very submissive and totally sorry for her actions. I might even twist the collar some if they are fighting me.
End quote.
Then she goes on to say, I would, of course, only do this, and there's sort of more description as to how to beat the dog. But then she says, of course, I would only do this with one of my own dogs or a dog that I knew I was boss over. I also use very strong, angry, low-tone verbal berating as I punish the dog. If you start it, make sure you win it.
Wow.
She then goes on to say, timeouts are not really punishment, just a chance for the dog to be removed from a situation. And then she goes on to explain that perhaps she should set the dog up, that she should put the dog in a muzzle in a situation with this dog that she's fighting with to get a fight started so she can beat the dog.
Wow.
She then goes on to say that this dog, quote, definitely needs to be taken down a few notches. Now, as disturbing as that is, once again, rather than judging the person that wrote this, because the person that wrote this, as I said, is a nationally renowned breeder who takes great care in where she places her dogs. I mean, this is not...
Sure. This is a caring
So
person,
she actually thinks that this is helpful.
Well, and as we discussed in preparing for today's show, one of the email is deeply disturbing, but what's important is how we can learn from this in understanding what the assumptions that these suggestions are made on.
That's what I think is so critical.
And we want to talk really quickly about what those assumptions are.
Because these assumptions are really commonly held. And these assumptions, by the way, are espoused by Cesar Millan. And so they've become much more popular recently in the last couple of years.
Right.
And the first one, if we go sort of back to what I talked about, the first one is, I think that's kind of interesting, is when she says that she's going to hurt the dog as much as the dog hurt the other dog in the fight.
Right.
As if somehow the dog can comprehend or quantify pain.
Right, that there's a yardstick for that.
That there's a yardstick for the dog and that has some sort of meaning for the dog. Mm-hmm. It absolutely does not. There hasn't been one study that would ever show that.
Right.
I'm not even sure there's studies in human psychology that show that humans work that way.
Right.
But someone will come in and tell me that that's not true. So if you know of any studies, let me know. Then back down to... that she will continue to beat this dog and hit this dog until the dog shows that she's submissive and sorry.
Right.
So what she's counting on here is that dogs have a sense of shame, which they do not. And if anyone really wants to look into this, Patricia McConnell's last book on animals and emotions, she talks about the different kind of emotions that we have. And I can't remember how she divides them up. I feel so bad. I should have looked this up. It's like public social emotion versus private emotion. But, like anger is personal.
Right.
And jealousy is personal. Social is shame, kind of these. And and she differentiates them and she contends that dogs only have like the very basic kind of anger, happy, but that they lack the ability to feel shame. Now, a lot of people say to me, and my clients have said this to me, no, when I come in and my dog's peed on the floor, they know they've done something wrong. They're hiding in the corner. They're cowering. It's like, no, what they know is you're really upset and you're going to freak out. They don't even know why.
Sure. Yeah. But they know that you're going to
because it has to happen within 3 seconds of the behavior for them to attach or associate your feedback with the behavior. Right. So if they peed 5 hours ago, so what they know is you're pissed.
Right.
And it's coming out of every pore. Mm-hmm. And so what people see as I'm sorry behavior is actually appeasement behavior.
Right.
Don't hurt me. Don't kill me.
Point being, it's very easy to misascribe what these reactions are.
Exactly.
And we do it all the time.
Sure.
And it's the biggest problem in interspecies communication is thinking that you can read the mind of a dog just by its physical appearance.
Anthropomorphication.
Exactly.
I mean, right there. It's like, well, I'd feel bad, so they must.
Right.
So that's in here too. Then there is if you start it, make sure you win it.
Right.
So I think this is one of the most damaging things to the human canine relationship. This notion that dogs are in some sort of power struggle with you, and that they're waiting to stage a coup, and they can't wait to beat you at things. And this is the whole, if they go out the door first, they're the boss of you. And you're not dominant over your dog. If your dog jumps on someone, you're not dominant over your dog. It's just poop.
Right. And we've read a lot lately about our perceptions of dominance, and let's be honest, there's a traditional belief in dog training that dominance is a really important part of it. There's the whole alpha thing,
right? Which was, the stratification or the hierarchy theory was born of a 1920s captive wolf study in Sweden.
Right.
It hasn't really held out to be true with wolves or dogs.
Or dogs, exactly.
And there's so much literature on how dogs and wolves are not the same anyway. Read Raymond Coppinger.
Well, and there's been a lot of study lately that places the hierarchy theory just in real doubt that it's a dynamic thing, that it may not exist at all. That
right. It's much more.
Alpha.
The original hierarchy theories born of that study don't play out for wolves either. But wolves seem to have a more rigid social structure than dogs do.
Right.
But it definitely doesn't apply to dogs.
Right, exactly.
It definitely doesn't apply to dogs.
Right, but so and back to kind of the so we've kind of discussed some of the assumptions and where we believe they're kind of off the rails in this. As this person said in their email, it's how to beat a dog 101, and we're not saying that to make light of it. What we're saying is to draw attention to a lot of people think this way, and there's a great deal of tradition that leads to this kind of thing.
If you think this way, then it makes this kind of behavior possible. Right. And Jean Donaldson makes a really good point. She thinks that I'm not saying that there isn't structure in a dog pack, and I'm not saying that hierarchies don't form in a dog pack. What studies seem to suggest is those hierarchies, and you alluded to this, are somewhat fluid,
right,
and really depend on the value of the resources to particular members of the pack. Right. But more importantly, our society, human society, is based on dominance.
Sure.
Might makes right. If you look at our military system, if you look at our social structures.
It's the way primates work, for the most part.
Sadly, no. It's the way we work, but not all other primates. There are plenty of there are some primates that do work that way, but the vast majority of other social species have what are called subordinates hierarchies. And you can look up Mark Bekoff's done some stuff on this, and there's actually a lot of people that have done. It's sort of a social theory, but with that theory, it's not that there's some leader who, through fear and intimidation, rules the roost. It's that there's a fair and just and centered leader. Everyone else in the pack recognizes it and trusts them, and they are the ones that therefore make the decision. So it's respect.
Right.
That puts them in the position of authority. And what's interesting is Ian Dunbar and Frank Birch did a 30-year study, and it was actually a study on mating with beagles. But what came out of the study was the alpha beagle, and that's the beagle that got to have the most sex, because that's what an alpha really is, right? They control the resources. That dog got in the least amount of fights. So this notion that, when people call me and say, I've got an alpha dog, they're fighting all the time. It's like, no, man, that's middle management. That's no alpha.
That's
so I think what this really comes down to is we are a really violent species.
So as you outlined at the top of the show, this is kind of a tradition in dog training, using aversives, as this person did the breeder did in this email, talking about how to beat a dog 101. Now, we've talked about some of the assumptions and kind of, where those kind of go off the rails, but talk to us now about the study from Penn that just came out at the taping of this show. This study came out. It's in the February issue of the Journal of Applied Animal Behavior Science. And Devin, the headline on this says, if you're aggressive, your dog will be too. So what is this all about?
Well, what the University of Penn did, and they have a wonderful behavior program, and Karen Overall is there, and she's highly respected in the behavior field.
Right.
She's one of the few, I think there's only 42 or 43 certified applied animal behaviors in the country. You must have a PhD, and you must do all this other stuff.
Quick side note, if somebody calls themselves a behaviorist, you might want to check the credentials.
Right.
Yeah.
It means nothing.
Right.
And actually, I find that the people that call themselves behaviorists have no other certifications.
Right. Check with your vet.
But applied animal behaviorist, that is a major certification, and that means something huge. So anyway, the University of Pennsylvania, they obviously get a lot of behavior cases. So what they did is the people that came to them, and this is a year-long study, that came to them with aggression, it was 140 people participated, and they were given a 30-point study. So there was 30 questions in the survey. And these 140 people were all there for aggression problems.
Okay.
The aggression existed before they got there.
Right.
And the survey, basically, the 30-item survey basically asked them, what have you done before getting here? What kind of training have you done? And basically, what they found was that the vast majority had used confrontational methods. 43% had hit or kicked their dog for undesirable behavior. 41% had growled at their dog. 39% had physically forced the release of an item from a dog's mouth. 31% had performed the alpha rollover, again, a dog whisperer recommendation. 30% had done a stare down of their dog, a staring contest with their dog, essentially. And 29% had done a dominance down. This is when you step on the leash so close to the collar that the dog rolls on its side. And then 25% had grabbed dog by the jowls and shook their head.
Oh, okay.
Now, not surprisingly, a good number of these dogs exhibited aggressive behavior in light of being treated aggressively.
Right.
So, and as I said, this is a guiding principle that I learned at Purdue when I did the dogs course there, that aggression breeds aggression.
Right.
If you use an aggressive response, a confrontational response with an aggressive dog, you will, the vast majority of times, increase the aggressive response.
Right. And let's be clear, in the context of this study, this wasn't bringing in 140 dogs that had aggressive behavior and at the end of the study saying, well, they're still aggressive. This was saying that the aggressive behavior notably increased due to aggressive training methods. Is that correct?
Well, what it's actually saying is, hey, we've got aggressive dogs. We've been trying to deal with this on our own. We've used these aggressive techniques to do so, and the aggression either hasn't gone away
or it's escalated.
Okay. And of course, what I thought was really interesting was the part of the study that it said dogs brought to the hospital for aggressive behavior toward familiar people were more likely to respond aggressively to confrontational techniques than dogs brought in for other behavioral reasons. So, in other words, you know, we look at when we look at aggression cases, there's aggression towards strangers, and there's aggression towards family, known to the dog. And so, in cases where the aggression was directed towards the family members, and these are, by the way, really sad and challenging behavior cases, because there's usually really the structure of the environment is often completely lacking or out of whack, and that's the hardest thing to change in a house is structure. But in the cases where the dogs were actually growling at their humans, their own humans, confrontational techniques elicited much more aggressive response than if the dog came in for peeing on the carpet and was swatted.
Right.
So in other words, if the dog was already coming at you to begin with, this was only going to amp it up.
I see.
Aggression was only going to amp it up. So here's what I think is so interesting about this survey. As I said earlier, the notion that treating aggression with an aggressive confrontational response doesn't work is well noted. There have been a number of studies about this. When you see it work, it's on dogs that have been quote unquote shut down. They have effectively been psychologically damaged, and they're forced into a state of what's called learned helplessness. So if most aggressive responses are fear-based, and your dog says to you, I'm scared. I know I'm growling and I'm lunging and I'm snapping, but what I really am is scared. And you beat them to the point that they cease to display that. All they've done is quit, right? It's like, well,
Right.
it doesn't matter that I'm terrified. I'm just going to live in terror all the time. But you haven't changed their feeling about what scared them, right?
Right.
You've
The fear
just
still exists.
you've just changed their willingness to share that information with you.
Right. Which can be even more dangerous.
Right. And so you actually see a lot of this on the Dog Whisperer. Now, in recent years, he's gotten a lot more positive, which I like. And I like his message that dog needs to be exercised more because, interestingly enough, in this study, the study showed that using non-aversive or neutral training methods, such as additional exercise or rewards, elicited very few aggressive responses.
Right. Right.
And, one of Cesar Millan's tenets of his training is exercise your dog more.
Right.
So it's not like all of his information is bad information. I think that his message that dogs need more exercise is a really good one. But
and it's one of your common prescriptions for just about any behavior problem, that a 20-minute off-property walk
two
every
20-minute
day.
off-property walks a day. I mean, that is the first prescribed thing at Purdue
Right.
and many other veterinary hospitals that you go to for behavior cases, 2 off-property walks a day.
Exercise makes all the difference in the world for dogs and humans.
For dogs and humans, it's true. So, but here's what I think is so interesting about this study, and this sort of takes us back to the email.
Right.
One of the things they were questioned on was, why did you use these techniques? Who recommended them? Where did you get them from? Their common use, this is direct, I'm quoting from the study, their common use may have grown from the idea that canine aggression is rooted in the need for social dominance, or to a lack of dominance displayed by the owner. Advocates of this theory therefore suggest owners establish an alpha or pack leader role.
Right.
And that the way to do that is using physical force. So I think what's so interesting is we have this study and we have this email. And this email really does a lovely job of illustrating what this study's talking about.
Sure.
How we justify using these methods. And I've met a lot of people, a lot of my clients said, look, back in the day, 20 years ago when I had a dog, we used a choke chain and we didn't know what else to do. And when the dog made a mistake, we popped them and I hated it. I mean, I've met so many people that were loath to hurt their dogs and didn't want to use these methods and were not aware that there was another way to do this. So it's not like I think people are like comfortably out there beating their dogs. I had a recent aggression case where a small dog displaying growling and some snapping was sent to a quote-unquote boot camp.
Right.
And they used the forced down, I'm stepping on the leash so close to the collar that the dog's pinned.
Right.
Now that dog is biting people.
Yeah.
And that dog is biting people because when it's scared, it figures if I don't make the biggest show imaginable, if I don't go all out, then I'm going to be powerless. And if you're scared of something, there's nothing worse than feeling powerless.
Exactly. Well, this is all, I think this all sounds like pretty scary stuff, and it is pretty scary stuff. The good news is, when it comes to undesired behaviors and what we consider inappropriate decision making, they're going back to what we were talking at the top of the show with negative punishment. There is a way to deal with this without getting violent towards your dog. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back with the Canine Campus podcast, we're going to talk about negative punishment and consequences and undesired behaviors and how to put the two together to help extinguish undesired behaviors. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with the Canine Campus podcast. If you want to participate in the Canine Campus podcast, we'd really look forward to hearing from you. You can get a hold of us at caninecampus.com on the internet. We've got a new group on Facebook, and you can just search for Canine Campus on Facebook. Join our group. We're going to have updates on what's going on with the podcast, what's going on at Canine Campus. So be on the lookout for that. And if you want to get a hold of us, if you want to participate in the show, if you have a question or a suggestion, you can send us an email at podcast@caninecampus.com. You can leave a voicemail on our website, actually, at caninecampus.com, or give us a call on our message line at area code 434-973-1050. That's area code 434-973-1050. And if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, give us a shout. It's a great way to reach thousands of dog owners. We've got a new show out every 2 weeks, and give us a call and we can talk about how we can help you get in touch with some great dog people. We'll be right back. Okay, Devin, so we've been through all the terrible things. Let's talk about some of the good things, right? I mean, this
should be titled The Downer Show.
Yeah, this is actually a really, it's kind of like the economic recession. Everybody says it's full of opportunity. I think as down as a lot of this has been, what you've been telling me and what we put into practice in terms of negative punishment with our own dogs has worked remarkably well, better than I ever could have expected. So talk to us a little bit about this and how we put this into play.
So negative punishment, just to remind everyone, means that you're removing something valuable from the dog's environment for a period of time when a mistake is made.
Right.
Now, just like with rewards, timing is critical. Mm-hmm. And as everyone might remember, you have 3 seconds to give a dog feedback on a behavior for the feedback to be associated with the behavior. Ideally, however, that feedback would occur within half a second, which is a really short period of time. Now, this is one of the reasons why I use a reward marker, like a clicker.
Sure.
Or yes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I would recommend people use is a no reward marker, a marker that says you could have had a treat, you could have had something good, but you lost it.
Right. And we use oops.
And why do we use oops?
It's pretty natural.
Also, you can't say it mad.
Right.
Unlike no. I mean, no has such baggage.
Right.
So when people say, well, I'm going to use no, I'm like, no, you can't use no. It's like, whoops, bad decision. Right. Because, it's too easy to say it angrily. And if you try to say oops with an angry voice, you just sound like a boob.
A fool, yeah.
I mean, you just laugh. So we use oops. So when a dog makes an inappropriate decision, and this is based on the decision.
Right.
If we have a dog fight, we don't use oops, right? I mean, this is different. This is like, oh, you jumped up and I didn't want you to. Oops. So to teach a dog a no reward marker, you show them something really good, like a treat. You put it, a couple inches in front of their nose. You say oops or whatever non-reward marker you want to use, no reward marker, and you take it away. You put it behind your back. You use 10 or 15 times. Whoops, goes away. Out again. Oops. Goes away. After 10, 15 times, your dog starts to realize that when you say, oops, they lose something.
Now, it sounds like a big tease.
Well, I mean,
Are you teaching this in the context of an undesired behavior?
No.
Or you're just...
No, it's just like the clicker.
The
you teach the no reward marker completely clean of anything else.
Okay.
And... one of the reasons why I like a no reward marker versus something like a no, which, by the way, is positive punishment, right? A loud no is positive punishment.
Because you're adding that to the environment.
And you're adding oops to the environment, too. But the consequence is negative.
Right.
But oops, again, is not an interrupter in and of itself. And it gives the dog the opportunity to do something else. Right. So if you say no or whatever, and if you use an interrupter is basically using your voice in a way that interrupts a behavior. Right. Kind of stops the dog in their tracks. And look, we all have parents. We've been oopsed or no'd. Yeah. We know that tone of voice where you stop and you know that you made a mistake, but you're not really sure what you should have done.
Right.
When we say oops to our dogs, almost always they sit.
It's true.
Because they were like, well, I wasn't sure, that I obviously wasn't doing what they wanted me to do. Right. But boy, when I sit, good things tend to happen.
Yeah.
And so it keeps them in the game. It doesn't shut them down. It keeps them working with you. It keeps their brain engaged.
Right.
It's like that wasn't, it's like hot and cold when you're playing that game, hot, cold. It's like, okay, that was cold.
It's an indication. It's an indicator that this isn't working.
It's a guideline.
Try something else.
So to use this in training, for example, we have our 2 dogs, Silly and Surprise, who were fighting.
Right.
We spent 4 to 6 months after the fight started separating them completely.
Right.
And the only time that they encountered each other during the day was food time. Meals. And their food bowls were actually placed... or food toys were actually placed within a foot of each other with a gate in between.
On either side of a gate, yes.
Now, if they were snarling at each other, I would have put them much further away. Right. But the bottom line is they were far enough away from each other where they could eat comfortably.
Yeah.
But were aware of each other's presence. So one of the best parts of their day happened when they were next to each other.
Right.
Another one of the best parts of their day is getting to be on the bed with us.
Right.
And so when and look, there was tons of training that went on in the midst of this. I'm not saying, this was a 3-step thing. We solved the problem. Boom.
This was an all day, every day kind of situation.
And I mean,
There's no doubt.
it's a year and a half later, I can look back and say, oh, isn't it great what we did? But I don't want to overly simplify this. I'm just sort of bringing out the highlights of what we did as it pertains to our discussion today.
It gave us a real opportunity to work with negative punishment on an incredibly regular basis.
Right. So in the midst of all of this, we're working on obedience in the same room and treats in the same, when you work with us, you're in the same room. So now one of their all-time favorite things is getting into bed with us in the morning. Right. And one of the things for coffee, we're having coffee, they're not. And one of the things that we decided to do was, okay, the only time or way you get that is if you're together.
Right.
It's 2 or none. So if they are on the bed and anything inappropriate happens, there's a growl, there's a hard stare,
right?
There's any inappropriate interaction, it's an oops and you're out of here. You lost the bed. And they're not out of there necessarily for the rest of the morning.
Right.
They're out of there for 45 seconds, maybe a couple of minutes. Then another sit at the gate, because once again, they have to earn the privilege of the bed.
Right.
So there's always a sit and stay at the gate. Then they're released and they're allowed on the bed again to try again.
Right. And with all kinds of training, repetitions are really part of the magic, right?
Just like there has to be repetition for rewards, there needs to be repetition for the mistakes.
Right.
And this is where people say, well, but positive punishment, it works so much faster. If I just, kick the dog hard enough, it's all over.
Right.
And once again, have they really learned anything other than to be scared of you?
Right.
Versus really having to use their brain. It's like, boy, when I do this, it doesn't end up the way I want it.
Right. And I think that goes back to, what we believe in, that it's not just this one good decision, it's learning to make good decisions.
Right.
Right.
I like dogs that have good self-control.
Right.
That come into a situation and don't have to be told what to do, don't have to be micromanaged. They have learned because we've set them up in enough situations to be successful.
Right.
But if mistakes are made, there are consequences. And when that happens enough, the light bulb goes on. Well, boy, to stay on this bed, I can't growl.
Right. And I'll toss another example out there. When we have one dog that likes to chew his bed and doesn't do it all the time, but when he's bored or wants attention, he'll go grab his bed and start chewing it right in front of us. And
he drags it to our feet
and starts tearing the stuffing out of it.
Boobity.
And what we've started doing with that is, if you do that, you're either in a crate, you lose us.
Yeah.
You not only lose the bed, but you lose us. You get to go to the other room, and we don't.
All right. So you just brought up, I think, the most important point of negative punishment. You must know your dog's reward systems.
Right.
Not your reward systems. Not what you think your dog finds rewarding. What your dog actually finds rewarding.
Right.
So if you're removing something that has no relevance,
right,
you're not going to solve the problem. When he brings the bed to us, and I mean, I'm telling you, he doesn't chew the bed unless he's right in front of us.
Right.
He clearly wants interaction from us.
He's left alone with it all day, and it stays intact.
It stays intact. It's only, I want attention from my mom and dad. So in that moment in time, what he wants is us.
Right.
What he gets for making that decision is losing us.
Right.
And, this has been going on for the last couple of months, and it's probably going to take another couple of months to peter out altogether.
Right.
And, initially, too, we were slow on the uptake because he'd bring it out and start chewing it, and we'd replace it with a desirable object.
Right.
No, you don't chew the bed, you chew your bone. Well, then I realized
and you get my attention.
The way he was getting the bone was by chewing his bed. Hello.
Right. Yeah.
A little slow on the uptake.
Smart dog.
Trainer.
Yeah.
What am I about? Being trained by my dog. So... And that's okay. I mean, it's not like this is a perfect science.
Yeah.
We made mistakes with I'm sure we made some of the mistakes with the aggression stuff.
Yeah.
90% of their aggressive displays and their fights involved us and wanting us as a resource. So clearly there was some structure in their environment that wasn't conducive to peace at that moment in time, whatever that may be. And I might not ever have figured it out. So you really got to know the dog's reward system. And one of the most common complaints I get or criticisms I get as a quote unquote cookie pusher, which is what positive trainers are referred to. Cookie pusher, is, it's all Pollyanna for you. You throw treats at everything. It's like, no, I don't. There are consequences for my dog's action. There are consequences that increase the chances of a behavior recurring on a regular basis, and there are consequences that decrease that behavior occurring to the point of extinction.
Right.
And the key there is knowing what's valuable to your dog in a moment in time.
Right. And using that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. We've talked about the back turn for jumping up, taking away what they want. I have a pet peeve about demand behavior dogs that paw me, dogs that, when I'm cutting up treats to take to Canine Campus, which I do on a regular basis,
right,
my dogs lie at my feet or nearby.
Right.
Because they've learned, and I don't ask them to lie down. I don't ask them not to jump up. I don't put them in any position. When the first few times when they were younger that they jumped up or tried to mug me for treats, I put the treats away and I walked away.
Yeah.
You won't get them that way. So when people say to me, well, my dog, goes bananas at food time, put the food bowl away.
Right.
Walk away for a minute. Come back. Oh, they do it again? Walk away again.
It works.
Do it 5, 6, 7 times in a row. Maybe over the course of a week or two, and once again, it depends on how often your dog's gotten to practice the behavior. If your dog's been doing that for 5 years, it's not going to go away in a week.
Right.
Might take a couple of months.
As with all training. Well, I think that's a pretty good note.
It's a process.
It's a process, and I think that's a pretty good note to wrap up on, Devin. Negative punishment, consequences for undesired behaviors. You can take yourself away and make all the difference in the world.
Right, but may I say this, that remember that if you're talking about aggression, that is an undesirable behavior.
Right.
But because it's not one based on a decision, abandonment or negative punishment is not the technique we use to handle that.
Right. So really so important to remember that you've really got to understand what the behavior is based on.
Is it a voluntary behavior or an involuntary behavior? Because if it's involuntary, you're over with Pavlov. That's using food in a very different way.
Right.
And once again, listen to leash reactivity, because that's what that's about.
Well, and Devin, you had actually diagrammed this for me. There was actually a flow chart that you created while we were talking about what we were going to talk about today. And I think it might be helpful at some point to recreate that, put it up on the website so that people can kind of follow along with what we're talking about.
We have a link to the study. The study's really interesting.
Of course, we'll have a link to the UPenn study and perhaps some similar studies from Purdue if we can find them. Thanks for staying with us. We're not taking the show away because you've been bad. We're just done for another week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the Canine Campus podcast. And in the meantime, do drop us a line. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want us to talk about. You can email us at podcast@caninecampus.com. You can visit our website at that same address. And you can always leave us an old school voicemail on our message line. It's area code 434-973-1050. That's 434-973-1050. Drop us a line if you're interested in sponsoring the show. And homework, as always, is go tell 2 people about the podcast and have them listen, because the more people that we have participating, the bigger the pack is, the better the show's going to be.
And go forth and train with a smile on your face.
Exactly. So thanks a lot, Devin. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
All right.